Have you ever felt like the ground beneath your identity simply vanished, like everything you thought you were just dissolved? That moment when the mirror no longer reflects a version of yourself you recognize. That, my friend, is what some call the dark night of the soul, and what I experienced was nothing short of ego death. Hi, everyone. Today I'm going to take you into the very heart of one of the most disorienting, humbling, and ultimately transformative chapters of my life. This is not just a story of sadness or struggle. It's the story of being unraveled, of forgetting who I was so something deeper could finally emerge. So if you've ever felt like you're coming undone, or if you're currently in the thick fog of emotional collapse, this might help you see that you're not breaking, you're awakening. Background. Before the unraveling began. Before I dive into the actual experience of ego death, let me paint a picture of the life I had before everything changed. I was what you might call a model student, straight A's, responsible someone who could effortlessly float near the top of the class without burning out. I wasn't the life of the party, but I was confident, assertive when I needed to be, and surrounded by solid friendships. I was the kind of kid teachers and parents liked. I followed the rules, didn't rebel, at least not outwardly, and did what was expected of me. But there was something more beneath the surface. Even as a child, I was spiritual in nature. Sensitive. You could say I had the soul of an old woman trapped in a young body. I felt energy deeply, sometimes too deeply. I'd often feel overwhelmed in ways I couldn't explain. Still, for the most part, I was a happy kid. Maybe a little awkward at times, but grounded and sure of who I was. Or so I thought. The beginning of the end. What triggered my spiritual awakening? It wasn't until I entered college that things began to shift slowly at first, like cracks forming in a windshield. And I can't quite pinpoint a single moment that triggered my spiritual awakening. But looking back now, I believe the unraveling began when I was suddenly removed from everything that had once defined me. You see, my parents had always been a strong force in my life. Loving, yes, generous and kind, but also incredibly overbearing. High expectations were the norm. They were the type of parents who meant well but cast long shadows. College was the first time I was away from their immediate influence. At the same time, my high school boyfriend and I broke up, and many of my close friends drifted away into a lifestyle I couldn't relate to. While they were out exploring the party scene and diving into college life, I felt disconnected, isolated, alone. And that isolation, I believe, triggered something deep inside me. It felt like the safety net of my old life had been pulled away. There was nothing left to hold on to, no roles to play, no one to impress. For the first time, I was utterly, completely alone with myself. Now, you might be thinking that sounds like a pretty typical college transition, right? But that's the strange part. Most people adjust. They struggle a bit, maybe, but they adapt. I wasn't incapable of adapting. I'm an adventurous soul. I've never been one to shy away from new experiences or personal risks, and yet, what happened to me was different. This wasn't just a hard adjustment, it was an ego death. At the time, I didn't even know that's what I was going through. I had never heard the term before. All I knew was that something in me was collapsing, something fundamental. What ego death really felt like. If you've never experienced an ego death, let me try to describe it. Imagine the sense of self you've always carried, the voice in your head, the identity you've spent your life building, slowly falling apart piece by piece. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. More like dissolving into mist. It started gradually, almost imperceptibly as I entered college. I felt disconnected, yes, but it deepened into something that resembled severe depression. I now understand that this kind of spiritual awakening doesn't always begin with light and love. Sometimes it begins with a void. It wasn't blissful, it wasn't euphoric, not at first. The bliss comes later, after the breakdown. What I felt was a complete loss of who I was. And I don't mean in the cliche, I'm lost kind of way. I mean I truly, sincerely had no idea who or what I was anymore. It felt like my subjective self had died. The me that I had spent years constructing, the student, the daughter, the girlfriend, the friend, the achiever, was gone. What remained? Just awareness. Just eyes looking out from an invisible place. A presence that watched, that noticed, but had no name, no story, no history. I remember thinking I don't exist. Not in a suicidal sense, but in a metaphysical one. like my essence had melted into some vast, unknowable void. I wasn't a person, I was just space, just consciousness floating in a world I no longer recognized. It was terrifying and peaceful all at once. Terrifying because I didn't know if I would ever return, and peaceful because there was no longer anything to fight for or prove. I know that might sound strange. And no, I wasn't on drugs. I've never taken any. Whether you believe me or not, this experience was completely natural. It wasn't chemically induced or externally triggered. It was something deep inside me, cracking open beyond reason, beyond logic. Why it matters, looking back now, I can see that ego death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more authentic. But when you're in it, it feels like complete annihilation. You lose your attachments, your identity, your certainty. And without all those things, who are you? The truth is most of us don't really know. We think we do, but our sense of self is so often built on external validations, grades, achievements, relationships, appearances. When those vanish, the real spiritual work begins. It's a kind of death that gives birth to something deeper. And for me, the dark night of the soul wasn't just a poetic metaphor. It was the most honest, raw, and disorienting experience I've ever been through. But it changed me, fundamentally. And I wouldn't trade that collapse for anything. Because what came after, well, that's what I'll share in the next chapter. Encouraging engagement. So if you're in a place right now where nothing makes sense, where you feel like you're losing yourself, I want you to know you're not alone. You might just be waking up. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt like your old self was slipping away? What was your version of ego death like? Until next time, take care of your soul and trust the unraveling. It's leading you home. In the previous part of this story, I shared how my sense of self completely collapsed, how everything I thought I was dissolved into something unrecognizable. But what came next was even stranger. It wasn't just that I didn't know who I was anymore, the identity itself stopped making sense to me. When identity becomes just an idea, the most basic fundamental elements of what we typically associate with identity, gender, age, race, suddenly became meaningless to me. I knew I was in a female body. I knew I was a 20-year-old Asian American woman. But those were just facts my rational mind could repeat like reading off data from a file. They didn't feel connected to anything real. It was as if I had lost the thread that tied those facts to a living, breathing me. All of it became abstract, just ideas floating in space, not rooted in any substance. Even my personality, whatever that was, felt like a mystery. Was I a cheerful person? A quiet introvert? Outgoing creative? I didn't know. I couldn't feel it. It seemed like I could pretend to be any of those things if I concentrated hard enough. But it would be nothing more than a performance, like wearing a costume on stage. None of it felt like it came from a true inner place. In that strange void, personality itself began to feel hollow. Not real, not me. Completely lost in the absence of self, I was lost, deeply lost. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know what brought me joy. I didn't even know what I was supposed to look forward to anymore. All the little beliefs and preferences I'd once had, those ideas we usually carry about ourselves so confidently, they vanished, evaporated like steam. It's so easy to assume that we know who we are. We go through life thinking our identity is solid, stable, dependable. But when the ego breaks down, that illusion is shattered. Your idea of yourself doesn't just fade, it scatters into thin air like ashes in the wind. And then you realize your identity wasn't something you were. It was something you believed. When belief systems collapse too. But it wasn't just my personal identity that collapsed. Even the things I believed about existence itself, my understanding of God, the universe, spiritual truth, they all went black. Everything that had once felt sacred or meaningful to me vanished. It was as if someone had turned off the light switch inside my soul. I remember looking around at other people and feeling completely baffled. How were they functioning? How were they so invested in their lives, studying, working, building relationships, chasing dreams? How did they not see what I saw, that it was all empty? I would watch people laughing with friends, making plans for their careers, setting goals for the future. And I'd think, why? What's the point? What meaning are they holding on to that has completely slipped through my fingers. The darkness of ego death, the only word that even comes close to describing what I felt during that time is darkness. I was lost in a deep, unlit forest without direction, without form, without a voice. There was an emptiness inside me, but not the peaceful kind. It was the emptiness of being completely untethered from this reality. I was watching the world through a glass pane, untouched, unmoved, and unseen. Everything people put so much meaning into their jobs, their families, their ambitions, it all seemed hollow to me. I couldn't feel the importance they felt. I couldn't participate in life the way they could. To me, everything was stripped of meaning. Was it depression? You might be wondering, was this just depression? It did feel like depression in many ways. I felt no joy. I was numb, unmotivated, emotionally disconnected. But I had experienced depression before. I knew depression. And this was different. This was not just sadness. It wasn't just a lack of interest in life. This was the complete and total loss of the self. It was as if my entire identity had been erased. I wasn't a person anymore. I was just awareness, a presence, a pair of eyes looking out from a place that had no shape, no substance, no name. I had become an abstract concept. Myself had been wiped clean. The long haul, not just one night. Many spiritual teachers refer to this phase as the dark night of the soul, but despite the poetic name, it wasn't just one night for me. It lasted years, 10 years to be exact. And no, I'm not exaggerating. The first 5 years were the most intense, the thickest part of the fog. During that time, I was submerged in the experience, lost, searching, disoriented. And the second 5 years, that's when the rebuilding began. Slowly, carefully, deliberately, because after everything had been stripped away, nothing felt solid anymore. Nothing could be taken for granted. I had to rebuild who I was from the ground up, rebuilding my identity. And that process, rebuilding my identity, is something I'll share in more depth in another video. It deserves its own space because it wasn't quick or easy, but for now I'll say this. It didn't happen overnight. It took me years to even begin. Because when your old self is gone and nothing feels real, there's no map, no template to follow. You start from zero. And slowly I began creating an identity that was no longer based on other people's expectations, not based on what society tells you to be, but built on something deeper, something more authentic, something that felt true to my soul even if I couldn't define it yet. Closing message. If you've listened this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart. If my experience resonated with you in any way, if you've ever gone through an ego death or something like it, please let me know in the comments. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one in my world who has gone through this. It would mean the world to know someone else out there understands. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps more than you know in getting this little channel out to others who might need it. As always, thank you so much for watching. It means more than I can say. Until next time, stay safe, stay grounded, and trust that even the darkness has its purpose. Warmly decode the hidden.